Welcome to the Backseat Leadership Podcast, a leadership conversation for those not in the driver's seat of their organizations. You can learn by visiting www.backseatleader.com. And now, here are the hosts of the Backseat Leadership Podcast, Geoff and Brad Merchant.
Well, hey, everybody, welcome to the Backseat Leadership Podcast. So glad you joined us. And man, I just can't tell you how excited I am. This is our, I guess it would be considered like our second interview. We had the wives on right at the start of the pandemic, and then things turned crazy, and it was funny. Funny? We'll say funny. But hey, we're so excited. We're starting some new things, and one of those new things is we're talking to some people outside of Brad and myself about leadership principles and the things that we can learn from other backseat leaders, people who are killing it in the backseat. And again, we're just so excited to dive into that conversation. This month, we've been talking about what does it look like to thrive in the backseat, even when you feel like you need to leave or move into the next seat of the organization or of your trajectory in life. And so we're super excited today. I'm pumped. Mentor of mine, friend of mine, a guy who has been cutting it in the backseat of organizations, church leadership for, gosh, Derry, how long has it been?
26 years, I think. No, I'm in my 26th year of doing this. Yeah.
That's crazy. So this is my friend, Derry Prankert. Derry is the youth lead. He's the youth students lead at Southeast Christian Church. And he's been there. Is it over a year? It's a little over a year now.
Yeah, I'm in 18 months. And if you can imagine that, think through what's happened over the last 18 months. It feels about like 26 years in and of itself. As we moved, a pandemic broke out, the entire church shut down with in-person getting, just a few things going on.
Just a few variables to making changes. Not a big deal, right? Not a big deal. That's awesome. Derry, I served with Derry at church in Napanee, Indiana for 4 years. And Derry and I we've back and forth since then. And Derry, what's unique about Derry is he served the previous, could be 4 years in the same church in his hometown, and we'll tell you a little bit about that. But Derry has served for so many years in a backseat leadership capacity, and has so many great. I mean, if you want to, you're going to hear some things in today's conversation that you could hear all about in his podcast, the My Third Decade podcast, which is still, is it still going?
The 1 year hiatus is almost up, man. Like there's just something about sitting in front of a computer during the midst of all the pandemic and stuff and recording episodes and trying to get adjusted to everything. But yeah, we're coming back, and there is a bank of about 56 episodes that are there that most of them sit. I tried to record a lot to keep it evergreen more than trying to respond in the moment to stuff. So that's there.
Right. Yeah. And like I said, it's a great podcast, a great way to learn about some of the things you're going to hear today. And so enough about me, enough about hearing my voice. Derry, you've been on an incredible journey over the course of your vocational career, but give us a quick story about maybe let's start with the time that you had in Napanee and kind of the maybe there's a couple moments where you're really wrestling with where you're at. But first, let's start with the story of being in Napanee for so many years and being just down the street from your hometown.
Yeah, absolutely, Brad. Here's what I was going to say. No Brad here. I got reset. I got to reset my brain. I thought we were doing a WandaVision recap, and that's why you didn't have Brad on. Man. And so there. Okay. I feel like we should do that.
We'll do that.
So bring me back on. We can do that. No. Hey, so Geoff, the story of my journey is crazy in the sense that I grew up in Wakarusa, Indiana. Napanee and Wakarusa make up the same school district. The high school I graduated was a half mile from the church that I did an internship with my sophomore year. The guy who was there, his name was Terry Bly, had his eye on me as a seventh grader, said, man, someday I'd love to invest in this guy. I'm at Bethel College at the time, now Bethel University, going into my sophomore year, declared a biblical studies major with the intent to go into full-time youth ministry. He offers me an internship in 1996. And And so, I put on my flannel and my Doc Martens, and I went there and started in leading middle school games with the intent to learn from a great church. And when I graduated from college, get out of that town that I grew up in. And then when 1999 hit and I graduated, Terry, along with the leadership there, sat down with me and said, "We believe we're ready to become a 2 full-time youth pastor church, and we would love to offer you a position." And I thought it would mean I was going to be the middle school pastor and we'd have a high school pastor. Instead, I was offered the role to be the assistant youth pastor, or assistant to the youth pastor. I say I was the Dwight Schrute of the church at that time. And so, again, there it is, from intern to assistant youth pastor. If you are familiar with the church world, that is very much backseat, probably like third row seat, roles as I'm going. And what continued on there was no intent to stay in the town I grew up in, but ultimately finding incredible ways to connect with students in that world, because I was one of them. I'd walk the same halls, and continuing on, and just an incredibly healthy work environment. The side of development was so valued there in that organization, where I was allowed space to develop and grow. And so I moved from assistant youth pastor to high school pastor who oversaw middle school, high school, then middle school, high school, and preteens, while still being high school pastor, then overseeing all of student ministry without being in one specific age group, to then stepping into what we called the next gen minister and overseeing what we said was from crib all the way through to college age and all the strategies with that. So it was a journey of there all along. And I think the thing that's fun that we can talk about in that is, because it was an organization with layers of leadership, there were moments where I was in the front seat, leading a staff, leading in direction, and getting a lot of trust built and freedom to run, but also never being at the point where I was solely in the front seat, always at some level in the back seat.
Yeah, that's awesome. And we obviously we share some of those years together, but Derry, the beauty of what you just described is that dichotomy of I'm in the front seat of some of the staff, but I'm in the back seat of the overall organization. Really quick, because there's 2 instances where in the process of you being at this church, this organization for so many years, there's 2 pretty critical instances to my mind, my recollection, where you wrestle through transition. Before we get to that, though, you made transitions inside the organization, inside the church. Yeah. Talk to us about, how did you know? I think there's 2 critical ones that probably stand out. One was when you stepped out of high school world and moved into overall student work, or their student ministry director, overall captain, whatever. And then when you moved over to the next gen role, where those were that kind of transition. So I'd love to hear that transition. I think there's probably one that's probably even more so when Terry steps out, right? So so this is the guy who comes in and identifies you and gives it a chance. So let's do that in chronological order. Talk about that transition from serving under Terry to then being handed the baton and said, "Carry this baton and lead the thing."
Yeah, and to add to just so everybody has context, Terry didn't leave. Terry moved out of that seat over into more of an adult ministry world, still was my direct lead, but handed the reins that he moved out of his chair, put me in that chair, and was an amazing leader. There was nobody pushing him out of that. It wasn't like I was stepping in to replace a toxic leader. If anything, the pressure and a guy who was so influential to me. So to walk into that I was set up incredibly well because I'd had years of being mentored and guided in a healthy way. At the same time, the pressures of wanting, the guy that one is a hero to me, and I'm stepping into his role, and it's almost like I don't want to disappoint Dad, that's there. Yeah. But also just that the sense of, man, it's my turn to carry the torch, and I want to do service to what's already been established. Now, I would say, as I reflect back on it, 90% of that pressure was self-inflicted. And about 10% was a legitimate thing I needed to keep in mind. And if I leaned into that 90% of that pressure at times, it actually made me an ineffective leader. And so that would be a thing I would just throw out. If anybody's in those moments when the reins get handed to you, be aware of how much pressure you're probably putting on yourself that nobody else is really, really big. So that's as I look back on it, that was the big hurdle in that move, because that move, at the time, I wasn't stepping away too much from what I already was doing. I still was having a lot of direct contact with the volunteer leaders that I was leading, the students I was investing in, and I wasn't really leading staff. I wasn't leading. I didn't have employees that were under me as that move happened. It was like maybe a little bit like leader among peers type of thing. And I was doing that unintentionally already, and so that would be that one. Now the big step to the next one was that where it was stepping out of being a high school pastor that led the student ministry team to truly being the student ministry pastor, where in the ministry world, and maybe I think any organization, there's a bait and switch that happens. You tend to say, I'm going to get into this so I can blank. I'm going to get into youth ministry so I can be with students. And it takes about a year to realize, wait, if I'm going to do this effectively, I've got to actually be developing the people who will be investing in the kids. And I'm sure that transfers over to so many different worlds in this all. And then it became clear, like that move was, I'm not just investing in these volunteer leaders. My true effectiveness is my time is going to need to be spent investing into the staff that I lead, so that they can then invest in the leaders and the students. So I got a distance from the thing I love, like the part that I was passionate about, seeing 12 to 18-year-olds have light bulbs come on, know what it looks like to devote themselves to something significant and greater than themselves, and to live out a calling and see how that shapes their life on beyond those 12 to 18 years old, So like I'm watching. And Geoff, you were a part of this. It was like this weird mix of incredible joy watching Geoff Kokenauer connect with these guys and these girls, and at the same time going, man, kind of wish I could be doing what Geoff's doing right now, and so that was the big challenge. But knowing, and I think it's that shift was about letting go to let others. So that was the big move there. The next one you asked about was that moving into the next gen role. And again, this is my context and others can pull from this. That was a lot about trying to figure out how I had amazing staff in place that I was going to potentially lose if I stayed in the role I was in. And yet I wasn't, I'll be honest, like I believe in the importance of a children's ministry. And I think it's really, really important. I don't have an ounce of passion about stepping into a room full of preschoolers. The only thing I love about preschool ministry or grade school ministry is that I get to drop my kids off at that, my own kids, and somebody else takes care of it, So it wasn't like, oh, get me in on this, but I valued it. I knew I was competent to be able to bring alignment. And I was able to draw off of enough passions that I could have of seeing, like, what if we were to go after this strategically together to step into it? But really one of the motivating factors in that was allowing a current high school pastor who needed to grow in his leadership, and I was getting in the way of his leadership opportunities, that it was going to be wise for me to step to the side to allow him to move up a seat and to keep, and also some others that we just weren't going to have the staff dollars if I continued to put it into there. So that move was a part of that, and I welcomed it, and it was awesome and healthy.
Yeah. So and thanks for sharing those. There's just so much gold in there. And so I'm going to go back and listen to this probably 3 or 4 times. I think there's so much to the shifts that happen inside of organizations, thinking that, oh, this is just going to be super smooth and easy. And yet there's pressures that come from each of those moves you made. There's different tensions and things you had to deal with, whether it was, oh, I'm moving further and further away from the thing I'm most passionate about in this, and you're right, that can happen anywhere. It's in student ministry, that can happen in church ministry, that can happen in the marketplace. You start by, I want to serve people and sell them this service, and then all of a sudden you get promoted to sales manager, and no longer are you serving those people, you're serving salespeople who are serving those people, and then even to move into more of a even further away, that next general, now you're getting serious, like senior leadership almost.
Yeah.
And now you have a whole new group of things to think about. So I love that part of your story, because I think that gives any backseat leader who's thinking about, okay, I don't know that I'm in the right position anymore. My life has changed. Go back and listen to the last two, go listen to my third decade and hear the process, because you wrestled through a lot of those things on the podcast that way.
Yeah.
There's two instances in your time at Napanee, this long period of time, where I'd say they're noteworthy. One of them was a wrestling with whether you should stay or you should go, and you didn't go. One of those was whether you should stay or you should go, and you ended up leaving. Let's talk about the first one. Tell us, there's a time when a buddy of yours is up in a different church, and youth ministry kind of idea, maybe it's change. You'd actually go work. Tell us a little about wrestling with this potential move to somewhere else and what caused you to stay.
Yeah, absolutely. So to give the context of it, it's about year 4 where I'm at Napanee Missionary Church that I'd been there. Year one of full time being there and living in this assistant 2 role. It's awesome. It's great. Right. I'm seeing the first group that I really walked with about to graduate from the ministry too. Like the first group I really walked closely with. And I give that context because it's just those. I think those are interesting things that when I talk to guys in youth ministry a lot, and remember what Geoff said. Like my third decade, my heartbeat and my bent is toward longevity, and so people come to me and say, "Yeah, I've been in youth ministry for 18 years or 15 years, 20 years as well," and I'll say, "Okay, tell me more about it." And what as I start to listen, I was like, I don't think you've actually been in. What you've done is you've been in youth ministry 3 to 5 years, 3 or 4 times over. And what I mean by that is there's a lid that gets hit. I think it goes beyond youth ministry world. I think this is true of other that right around years 3 to 5, something starts to shift. It gets tough. And that was happening for me while this opportunity comes up at another church in Michigan. And really felt like I needed to lean into it. Find out, go up, talk. It was an opportunity where I was going to sit in the lead seat in a youth ministry. My buddy was saying, "I want you to lead me." It was going to be a chance for me to break out from this place that had developed me and maybe make it my own. There was an offer on the table. Like it was there. And my wife and I spent tons of time there in tons of time in prayer, tons of time processing, talking with people. And really it got down to at the time I felt like I feel like this is a moment where I'm not in I'm in a win-win situation. And if anybody's ever had those, it's weird because that's awesome, but it's really frustrating, right? Because it'd be kind of just nice if you knew, get me out of here. Now I know. And I hate making decisions. The wing 6 of me is afraid of all the fallout of my Enneagram 7 wing 6. The adventurer in me is all pumped, but what if I make the wrong decision? So ultimately, though, when it gets down to it, at the time we decided it was a thing where we were both off on our own. My wife and I working after a post-missions trip, a short-term mission trip. We take those kids working through our next steps. And we were in the process of potentially buying a house, which would mean we would have stayed in Napanee or going to Port Huron. And I wrote down on one of my steps, close on the house. And I went over and I showed it to my wife. She showed me her thing. She said, move into the house. And we just both separately had come to this conclusion. We stepped forward with it. And really what's interesting is at the time, it was kind of I think we just made this choice. As I look back on it, it was the right choice for a lot of layers, because I think I at the time, it was hard for me to be at the level of self-awareness that I am now to understand there was something in me kind of wanting to run from the next challenge that was going to come, inheriting a new group. There was a desire, a motive that was a little bit of, I think I can figure this out on my own. I'm kind of sick of sitting under the shadows of this amazing guy. Let me do my own thing. And I wasn't ripe enough yet. I was a lot more green than I realized. And what followed, what's crazy is what followed in the next 3 years were some of the most fruitful, like big time in advancing and seeing students radically like live out on mission in their schools in a way I hadn't seen before, as well as my wife getting established and gaining trust in the community. And so ultimately, like, I would love to say we had this great wise reason why we didn't go. We took a step off of just in that moment, but we look back and see, oh, these were some of the things that weren't maybe the best fuel moving us forward to that next thing.
Sure. Well, I think sometimes it's easy to look at the pros and cons of a potential move and go, well, there's too many cons to the pros. Yeah. But when you get to the place where you've got an offer on the table, and you look at you were going to have complete autonomy in that situation, right? The senior pastor at the time was super hands off. I'd know because he's my boss.
Yep.
But he's a great dude, and the church was blowing up at the time. Like, just everything was exciting about the time. So I'm sure your pros list was not short.
Right.
And I'm sure your cons list was, a wrestle, I'm sure. I think that there's an element here, especially for our listeners who maybe aren't in a church and they don't feel like, well, maybe I need to pray about, like, I think there's a significance to the meticulous providence of God. I think that's the way I describe it. That's how our old boss used to say, the meticulous providence of God, that he's going to orchestrate certain things to happen in your life and to make straight those paths, right? We don't lean on our own understanding. We lean on God's view of the world, and we make straight those things that don't make sense to us all the time. So I love that. The wrestle of, here's this potential opportunity, but there's a lot of stuff kind of going on in your own heart, your own mind, and your wife Janelle's like, processing stuff, and I love the fruit that comes out of that.
Yeah.
Now
let me throw something out too in that. I think that this goes beyond too, that if I can like get a little like pushy outside the church world, that like inside the church world and outside the church world, there can be two motivating factors on the move to the what's next, especially if it's a move forward in a seat. Sure. And they are money and power. That a motivating factor could be, I would argue those cannot, if those are lead factors, be prepared to be disappointed. Like those can be factors to think in it. But honestly, like from my biblical understanding, money is not evil. Power is not evil, but they have the potential because of our fallen nature to become places where evil can come out in so many ways. And so even with that, like that was a part too, like there was going to be a pay bump in my move to Michigan, and there was going to be an opportunity for me to have some more power and autonomy. And that comes out in my other times where things have come. Anytime, I would just encourage anybody that when you're thinking about should you go, if the driving factor is one of those two, raise the flag big time and slow down.
That's good. That's really good. And I think that you're right. And especially the tension you talk about, that season of potential transition, it could get tough again where you're at. And this other place looks kind of sexy, right? It looks kind of like, oh, money, power, opportunity, platform maybe gets bigger. Are those things really worth it in exchange for the long-term investment and the things that we'll talk about at the end, the principles you've got, which I think are just really great. So that's an instance where you didn't leave Derry. And then there's the instance where you did leave to be where you're at now. And a different season. You've gone through the progression at Napanee now, where you're the next gen pastor. You've moved in the organization. And now you're to the place where this other opportunity comes into view. Give us because it was a process. I remember walking through this with you. Give us the process of determining it's time to leave.
And just so everybody's clear, these are not the only two times where opportunity throws up. When you're at some place for 23 years, I had offers for people to talk about, want to go to a parachurch type organization, you want to help plant a church, would you be interested in stepping and being a senior pastor? It seems like you're, and it was motivated with different, like when people come to me, seems like you've been in this long enough that it might be time for you to, step up and do this new thing. And honestly, I've told you this, like anytime a senior pastor offer would come, I'd throw up in my mouth a little bit. And that's never been an aspiration for me. And sure. Being, so get me to that point too, being at one place, like the fruit I was seeing, the roots that were built in the community, the knowledge and the way I was able to help the church in that time, as I'm a next gen pastor going on my 23rd year there, and just like loving what I'm doing, there was still something like that was stirring inside of me. And the reality was, as I was in that role, it wasn't that I wasn't finding fulfillment, but there was a wrestling that was beginning, because ultimately, you guys have talked here on life trajectory and life mission for me. Like I could never kick that my life mission was about the next generation. Mm-hmm. And that I was always at my most excited when it was directed inside that, like the middle school, high school years. Like if I could find my arm's length connection to that, I was so pumped. And the church Napanee was at a point where potential transfer in head leadership was coming, and it's in the process right now as we're talking. Right. And and the words I use, because I'm a pastor and I'm going to be really cute with my alliteration, was there was a lane issue, a location issue, and then just about my life calling. Lane, location, life calling. Up until that point, the lane of student ministry and the location of Napanee, Indiana, were in alignment with where my life calling was. And what was happening though was being at a place for 23 years. Imagine, as a transfer of leadership is going to happen, the role and help that I could offer to a place where in the next phase, it was like, you know what, I think I'm going to best serve Napanee, Indiana, Napanee Missionary Church by maybe stepping further away from the student world. At the same time, this role opens up in Louisville, Kentucky, at a church that I've walked with several staff members at that church and know through life, and they're looking for a student ministry leader at it's a large enough organization where there is a need for somebody that's going to sit in that lead chair at one of the campuses and lead a team of staff that's investing specifically in middle school, high school, and college, and then can like invest in other campuses, their student pastors, not necessarily by leading them, but just being available to them. Right. And it was funny because a year before I was talking with a mutual friend of ours, Corey Lance, and he said, "Hey, what's your dream job?" I told him, "It doesn't exist, man." And he's like, what do you mean? I said, I would to be where I'm actually investing in youth pastors. And like my investment into the next generation is in the occupational people that are doing that and able to do that in a way that it could spread to have a platform, not just in one church, but in multiple churches. But I don't want to step outside the local church. I'm not, the only way that happens is if it's in a parachurch. So this opportunity comes along at the same time. We're working through some stuff with our family and just like, where's the best place inside of some of our family dynamics? We might need to look at a more diverse community setting. Two of my sons are African-American through adoption. And just ultimately like a lot that's stirring. And so when this opportunity comes along, we go through a process that went from June all the way to October, and didn't want to leave. Like I would have loved nothing more than to say I lived my entire career at one place. I mean, I was building a brand, so to speak. I wasn't trying to, but building a brand about being the guy that served at one church only for all these years and run the risk of that. But ultimately made this move in November of 2019. Yeah. And I it's, you and I talked a couple times that we got to connect as you were in that process, just hearing you wrestling with the exchange of this tenure you have in this church versus the new opportunities, which look great, right? I mean, because
who doesn't like the idea? Well, some people don't like the idea of new opportunities, but there's a lot that you could do creatively and things there.
Yeah.
For you, like if you were to say, if I had to nail this one thing was the right hook or the convincer, and obviously I'm not saying that you moved without a shadow of a doubt. Everybody, has those. How's this going to go? And then as you get there and as you transition and try to build relationships inside the organization, outside with family and stuff. What was the one thing that maybe just said, you know what, this was the clincher for you in determining that you should leave?
Yeah. I told you I hate making decisions, so I'm gonna give you two. I'll give you the one that is like the tangible, and the other one that I might surprise some listeners with. The one was just as it leaned in more, it became clear, back to that lane and location thing, that it became clear the lane of student ministry is not over for me. And it's time. This is my moment to double down on that in the move.
Awesome. And
having to grieve the location change, which I to this day love Napanee Missionary Church in Napanee, Indiana. Like that is I love and do miss that. But ultimately, like the understanding of this sets me up for a continued run in a way where I think I can serve this place the best. I can serve the location of Southeast Christian Church Blankenbaker the best in that lane. And so that was the hook. That was the deciding factor professionally. The surprise one for people I would say it was my spouse. It was my wife. My wife was a key factor. From the beginning, the other part of the story is she was in a dream position in Indiana. And I actually, for some time, was wrestling if it was time for me to make a move like this, but ultimately, like, no, I'm not going to do that to my wife. I'm not going to do that to my family. They win in this case. And from the moment this opportunity rose up, she was the one pushing more than me to say, we've got to pursue this. She was the one at a level of confidence. And one of our mutual friends, again, Geoff Bachman, Geoff is a guy I called in the midst of this because he had worked through a change. Yeah. He did one big change that just blew up in his face. He did one change that was incredibly healthy. And I had him like walk through with me on some thoughts. And so he gave me some of the most golden advice I give to anybody when it's a change. He said, Derry, when it gets down to it, there's probably going to come a point where you can weigh everything out, but ultimately you got to trust your gut and listen to your wife, Derry. And as a person of faith, trust my gut. Really what I'm saying there is I'm going to trust the Spirit's leading, the Holy Spirit's leading, and I'm going to listen to my spouse, the one who knows me better than anybody and is going with me on this journey. If we aren't on the same page, there's no way. And it's great. There's a Zaxby's chicken restaurant, not my favorite restaurant in the world, that sits right outside of Southeast Christian Church. We went through the process. We sat at that Zaxby's. We looked each other in the eye. We bawled our eyes out and said, this is where God's leading us. And we were bawling because we were grieving, but we were also joyous because we were in alignment and knew this is where we're supposed to go. So the lane versus location thing, lane one, and my wife was pushing me and fully on board. Yeah.
I'll never forget, you said the first time you weren't sure if you were going to apply. And she was like, you got to go for this, Derry. I love that. I love that principle. Okay. So thanks for sharing that story, Derry, because both of those instances and just even your process has been great. I think we can go back and learn so much from it. Give us, I asked you to give us like 3 or 4 tips, principles, and because you're a pastor and you're really good at this stuff, you came up with 3 phrases of be awares, right? So give us like, as backseat leaders, as we think about, should I stay, should I go? What do I do? Give us some principles on how we can best navigate that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just want everybody to know, remember, I even though I'm the guy that just made a change a year and a half ago, my bent is going to be to try to talk you into staying. Like that's my bent. I want to say, what if you, everybody's like, what if you went to the next thing? My first question to most people is, no, what if you stayed? What's it going to take? And so they may come through in this, and I just think it's really important. But these are things I think is if you're at a point where you're going, I wonder if I'm done here. I wonder if it's time for me to make a move, or there is an opportunity to make the move. I think these apply. The first is be aware of seasons. Be aware of seasons. And what I mean by that is an opportunity comes up. Be aware of the season that you might be in. And I'll give a couple examples on this, Geoff. One is like an actual true seasonal thing. Being at a place for a long time, people and advocating to stick it out at a place, people will contact me a lot of youth pastors, a lot of others saying, "Hey, I'm just thinking about leaving. Tell me about it." There, if I were to draw out a graph on like months and seasons of the year in the Midwest where I get the most calls, it's February and March. I consistently will get the calls during that time. And there's two factors to that in the context I sit in. It is the most dreary season in the world in northern Indiana. And it's just, seasonal sad. Is that what seasonal anxiety disorder?
Seasonal anxiety disorder.
Yeah, it's legit. Whatever it is, it's legit. But then when you're doing student ministry, it's also like in the midst of the school year, where like just parents get more angry, people get frustrated, you're dealing with stuff, leaders start burning out. And so I'll always tell people during that time, like, hey, you got to give yourself at least a month or two, see how you feel. And I've had to remind myself of that. So there's that type of season. The other is being aware of seasons in life. We talked about the transitions. There's other transitions in that. Think about, I was at a place for 23 years. I went from single youth pastor to married youth pastor. I went from married youth pastor to father of one, then father of two, then father of three, and father of four. Every one of those were a season that I had to adjust what I was doing and being aware of that. And then the last season I'll throw out is that speaks to right now in this season. I have not talked. I like the effects of what COVID has done. For backseat leaders. For any leader. No lead. CEO, CFO, nobody's led through a pandemic that's still alive. Right. It's not. Sometimes like, man, I'm going through a tough time. I guess I'll talk to, who went through the Spanish flu that we could talk to right now is not a really good thing. And so this season is one where I'm seeing so many people wanting to give up. I am one of them. I mean, I have worked through some depression level stuff in the midst of this time. I'm like, what did I do? And it's hard because I don't know how much of that is tied to COVID and working through it. And although we're coming out of it, the long-term effects of that are going to be significant. I guarantee you, if you're a backseat leader, your leader made a call that was terrible in the last year. It was a terrible call. They shouldn't have done it. And the temptation is going to be to allow that baggage to carry into whatever's next and say, like, I don't know. And just, I think we got to have high grace to all of our leaders and to ourselves over what we've gone through and are coming out of in that. So be aware of seasons, stop and say, okay, am I ready to get out of here because I'm working through a tough season? I need to press on. So that's the first, be aware.
It's good.
Want to go to the next one?
Yeah, let's do number 2.
Okay. Next one is, be aware of motivating factors. Be aware of motivating factors. I think when it comes to motivating factors, what I'd say in this is why am I being like excited about this next thing? My 2 examples, as I look back on that first one, there was maybe some bad fuel that could have been driven in that. So I got to be aware of that. There can be a lot of motivating factors that come into this. Like, some are really like out of our control. Some are in our control.
Sure.
And what is that? I think a key question, everybody that's getting ready to maybe look at a transition, that I would encourage you to ask is this more about me stepping away from something or stepping into something? Stepping away or stepping in? And both of those can be legitimate reasons. And more times than not, it's going to be both of those things. There may be times where it's only one, but I think every time there's going to be one that's more of a tyrant.
Sure.
And if it's about stepping away, I need to be aware of that in a different manner than if it's stepping in. And what I can say about that is, like, if it's a stepping away, and the reason to step away could be out, like I said, it's out of my control in the sense of, from again, a person in a church setting, if there is like just unethical, immoral stuff going on, I'm out of there. Bad theology. And I would say anybody that's of faith should be, that's a reason to step away. Like, I can't be a part of this corrupt business,
right.
Stepping away from it. Good good reason. But also it could be I'm running away because I don't want to face into it. I mean, if I'm running away, then I need to stick it out and press into it. If I'm stepping into something, that's what I did here. I stepped into something. It was not about what God was calling us away from or what we were stepping away from. It was more about what we're stepping into. The trick with that is, man, it's really tempting to look back because I joke, Janelle and I joke a lot, right? We stepped away from our old place a little too well, that now we like there's a temptation to go, what if we went back? Where you step out of something and it was toxic, it's like burn those bridges, we're good to go. But if that's the case and you're going to carry into, if you're stepping away from something, the chances for you to carry the baggage and toxicity of the past and start to project that into what you're going into could be a major mess. So if you're going to make the move, you got to be aware of that. If you're still in the process of thinking about making the move, you got to stop. I would say stop and measure like 3 or 4 times if it's about stepping away before you make the move. And if it's about stepping into something and you're not stepping away from something bad, stop and remind you really need to grieve, like have a funeral service for what's behind, or you're going to be looking back a lot. We could spend a lot of time talking about how I've been doing that, but ultimately like literally maybe bury something, burn something, just to say like, that season is done. It's time for me to look ahead.
Yeah. Get some finalization on that. And I think you mentioned it earlier, that life trajectory gives you some answers on, am I running away from this because it's just hard and I don't like hard things? Or am I running towards something out of health, and knowing how it fits in you? Without a life trajectory, you can't answer the question, lane, location, and life calling. And I think that's really, really great.
You're exactly right.
So be aware of seasons, be aware of motivating factors. Derry, what's number 3?
Yeah. Be aware of the losses in the midst of potential gains. Now this could build off of the one before, but be aware of the losses in the midst of potential gains. And I might be talking to a specific type of individual at this time, but I think it's in all of us. When we're in the midst of whatever is going on and we start to look at something else, the grass is always greener is a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. Like the grass always seems greener on the other side. And there's things we don't know that will change, that we might lose. We don't know totally what we lose until we take that step. We don't know totally what we're gaining until we take that step. But often in the midst of a transition, there can be this thing in our eyesight of like, well, I'll get this and I'll get this, but what are you going to potentially lose?
Right
now? And I'll just throw out a couple examples, especially if you've been in that, if you're that backseat leader over time. There are 2 major losses that I have had that I knew, but man, do I know more than ever. So hear the wisdom of somebody that's made a move and is seeing it. The 2 biggest losses are trust and experience. I've lost trust and experience. Now trust is gained by more than tenure. Like there's more than, it doesn't just take tenure for trust, but I will tell you that like the level of trust that's gained over tenure is like tenure galvanizes, longevity galvanizes trust. I mean, like scenario, I could see myself back at Napanee Missionary Church in 2018 coming and saying, hey, I have this idea for our camps. Let's go ahead and we're just going to like let everybody, when they get there, choose wherever they room. It can be guys and girls together. I don't care. Stupidest idea to ever come out of my mouth. But I bet there'd be a side where actually people go, I wonder why Derry would say that.
Would that work?
Just for a moment, even though it's the dumbest thing you've ever heard, it would just be like, well, if he's been doing this for so long, we got to at least pause and ask. I come to Southeast, I bring that up, I'm fired on the moment, on the spot, right? Stupid example, but just to kind of get the context of like the level of trust over time is significant. And there's a rebuilding that will happen, and there's all of that experience, being able to draw from the experience and bring it right back to the context you've been serving in with longevity. Now you're taking experience that you're in the move, and it's valuable. Like my experience here is valued, but it's also questioned, because immediate is like, well, that worked for you there, but will it work here?
Yeah.
Legit question. But it's a challenge. So those are examples out of my world, but be aware of that. And I guess the challenge in that is make sure you are like, at the very least, even if you can't identify the losses, make sure you recognize like, this is not going to solve all my issues. In fact, there's going to be new issues that rise up.
Yeah.
So
yeah, we've talked about it on this, not on this episode, but on previous episodes about the Fadling quote out of Unhurried Life, that we run from where the grass doesn't look so green to where the grass looks green, the grass looks greener.
Yeah.
Not realizing that perhaps what we needed to do and one of the losses that we will have to endure is we could have watered the grass right where we're at. And we know where the hose is, and we know the fertilizer's at. We could just take care of this grass. We don't necessarily know if that's going to work over there. So that's just really, really good. Be aware of seasons, be aware of motivating factors, be aware of losses in the midst of potential gains. I feel like there's one more, right?
There's one more. I'll just say this. Be aware of yourself enough to seek insight from others. It's a long statement, but be aware of yourself enough to seek insight from others. Like, you can be the most self-aware person in the world and still have blind spots. And if there is a transition now I would warn you, and if I could go back and do the transition that I just went through differently, I think there's some things I would do differently. But one thing I did was, it wasn't a large, massive group, and it wasn't broadcast to the world. It was people I knew I could trust, and I brought them in on the journey at different phases. Geoff, you were one of them, because we've walked a long time in different ways. You've had me lead you. We walk in ministry as brothers from a distance, but spend a lot of time. So you just knew what was going on. I brought some people in and said, hey, I need you. I'm bringing you in on this one, again, as a person of faith. Pray with me through this. But ultimately too, give me thoughts. Like, does this make sense to you? What doesn't make sense to you? If you were me, what would you ask? One of the things I did was, I was great. I'm grateful to have a friend who made a move out, like moved the whole family, went, and it bombed. And so I was tempted to not go talk to him, because I'm like, I'm afraid of what he's going to tell me. But I went and talked and said, hey, talk me out of this off of your experience. Right. And he did. Right. He didn't talk. I still said yes, but he gave me some incredible insight to think about things in ways I shouldn't. And I guess if I were to say one guiding principle in this is, if you're making the move and you haven't gone to talk to somebody that you're afraid of the response they're going to give you, you trust them, but you're afraid of the response they're going to give you, then make sure you go do that. Don't go find the people that are going to tell you what you want to hear. Who are the people that are going to tell you what you need to hear, and you trust them, and they've shown they have trust. Like, that is like wise counsel is great. Now, there's a problem with wise counsel. There's this incredible story that's actually in the Old Testament about counselors leading Rehoboam and Jeroboam terribly, right?
Right.
And you can go look into that at some point. There's a point where ultimately there's a greater voice in this, the guidance of God, and God has guided people in like I'm sure the idea of I don't think there are many people in Abraham's life when God told him, hey, go and move out of this land to another, that were like, that sounds like a great idea. So I recognize that, but there's many, many examples of those that didn't seek the wise counsel that's around them. So that would be my last one.
No, that's really, really good. I think this applies to all of our friends who maybe you're married, maybe you're not married. Because you were talking to me your story that Janelle was a prime mover in that, and the fact of the matter is that even for some of our married friends who, their professional considerations, their wife doesn't necessarily, or their spouse doesn't necessarily have all of the insights and all that stuff, and maybe their relationship isn't that way. So having all these other people in their lives to wrestle those things down can be critical. And I love what you said. If you haven't asked that person you're kind of afraid of what they might say, that's so good. That's just golden. And if you need to bring that person in and let them speak into the situation so that you can have all of the perspective, I think that's absolutely critical. Derry, this has been a great conversation, and I hope that as our listeners are listening through, like, there's just so much, this is, I'm going to go back and listen to it again, obviously, because I'm going to edit it. But I really appreciate you just sharing your story. There's so much more into the process. You detail it in a couple episodes on your podcast. You get Janelle's perspective on your podcast on how you made this move to Southeast. It's really, really good. And even some of this, other episodes on your podcast, you talk about how to lead, how you and I interacted as an intern, and you're a boss and that kind of stuff. There's other people that you interview on there. There's other great principles on leading staff and those type of things, and how you can leverage those things. And maybe some of our leaders are beginning to get in that place. Our listeners are beginning to get to that place where they are leading staff. I encourage you, check out the Backseat Leadership. You are checking out.
Check out the Backseat Leadership podcast. Yeah.
This is what happens when you go up on stage without notes. And but do check out My Third Decade. It's again a great podcast, part of the Download Youth Ministry Podcast Network. And if you've been around me at all, you've heard about that. If you've been around Derry, you've heard about that too.
Yeah.
Derry, any last words, any encouragement to backseat leaders and the role they find themselves? What's one last shot you just want to leave our listeners with?
I think the thing I would say is, and you guys have hit this, don't buy the lie that promotion equals getting into the right fit for you, or the next best step is promotion. I love being in the second chair of leadership, the freedom that's there, the opportunity to lead up and influence. There is so much to be grown in. If you're sitting in a spot and saying, I need to grow, therefore I need to move and promote. And I know you guys have said this, I just want to affirm it, that is a false equation. Yes, it's possible, but there is so much growth to be had in the seat you're sitting in right now. Don't miss that. Maybe God is calling for a new, or there is an opportunity for a new person to step in where you are, and you're that person. So become that person. That's so good. That's what I got.
That's just really, really good. And again, appreciate your insights, Derry, so much. And again, if you're listening right now and you've never interacted with Derry, check him out. He's on all the socials, and you can check out My Third Decade, the podcast, and just all that stuff that's there. It's really, really good. Thanks a lot, Derry. Appreciate it so much.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for this, Geoff.
Yep. Thanks for listening to the Backseat Leadership Podcast. We'll see you next time on the next episode.
Thanks for listening to the Backseat Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, subscribe and leave a review to help other backseat leaders join the conversation. For more information, visit www.backseatleader.com.